Hello class, hope everyone is doing well. Welcome back to your favorite class, INST377. Alright, so this week I'd consider pretty fun. So this week, compared to previous years, so previous years this week used to combine quite a few things. I'm actually breaking it up this year, so this week is half of it, and the next week is another half, so it's a little better to follow along, easier, quicker, although, and I guess easier to understand, etc. Just so it's not information overload. So, yeah, but today's really exciting because what we're going to be doing is databases. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I actually love databases. I work with databases every day, and so does every single software engineer. Databases are the backbone of software engineering, pretty much, right? Because that is how we store and get data, which shockingly most of software engineering relies on to either store, get, manipulate data in some way. So databases are a really important part of that, right? So most companies use things like Postgres, Dynamo, MySQL, those kind of things. All of those are great options that will allow you to, you know, use databases. So what we're going to be doing today is actually setting up a database and also using it in our Node.js app, which I'm really excited about. And remember, this is a requirement for the project, so it's going to be very useful, right? But once again, I want to clarify, this has no bearing on assignment 2, which if you haven't started with yet, I implore you to, because it's challenging, right? So please start it as soon as you can, all right? So with that, I'm really excited to get started. We're going to be covering and making some databases and stuff, so I'm really excited. With that, let's hop right on over and get started. All right, so today, as I mentioned, we're going to be covering databases and not more JS in the traditional sense, but more like how we leverage SDKs and JS specifically for like Express and how we deal with errors, those kind of things, how we do different things. So there's a little bit more JS, not much, but a little bit more informational stuff about JS. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, a database, right? I think most of you know what it is. I think one of the prereqs for this class is a databases class. So most of you have probably worked with databases in a traditional sense, right? A database is just a way to store long-lived data, right? So, some way to store it, some way to retrieve it, etc., right? A database is a way to do that. And the benefit of a database is that it is accessible from pretty much anywhere, right? You could be in Europe, and you can access data, right? I would hope so, right? Like you go to your bank and you can access the bank data even if you're in Europe or if you're in America, right? So a database allows you to access data from anywhere, right? And store data from basically anywhere, right? As long as you have internet, right? Now, the best thing about databases, not only is that it can be accessed from anywhere, well, it can be accessed programmatically in the code, which is a huge unlock, right? Because that means that I can take data from the user, store it in the database, and then manipulate it and send it out to them later, right? So databases are a really important cycle of programming, right? Because 90% of things, 99% of things you see on the web have a database component to it, right? So, for example, right, when you go to Google and you search something, it's not instantly generating those results, right? It's not going through all those websites and figuring it out. They have a database that stores all these indexes and everything and basically goes and gets you that data, right? They have a huge database, but yeah, right? Or as something as simple as a bank account, right? That number, shockingly very important, has to be stored somewhere, right? And that's stored in a database, right? And so to do that, when you click deposit or withdraw from your bank account, there's code that goes to that database, withdraws that number or subtracts, and then gives you the money, right? Now, the key thing is this is not a database class. I want to be clear about that, right? So I'm not going to expect you to do like Cartesian joins or inner joins and try and figure out some crazy PL SQL procedures. This is not a database class. Our only goal in this class is to learn basic database operations and how we interact with them from JavaScript, right? Because that is part of our final app. We want to use a database to store and retrieve data from, right? So everything we're covering is primarily operations in relation to web apps. We're not going to be doing anything complex, nothing fancy, just very straightforward, kind of like operations. So Just keep that in mind. All right. So first, let's start talking about what kind of database options we have, right? Because there are thousands, billions of databases, right? A lot are free, a lot are expensive, right? And yeah, so there are many types of databases themselves and also options for each of those, right? So first is this database called an in-memory database. What is that? Well, an in-memory database is basically like if you launch a container, right, you can actually host the database in the container. Now, the problem with that is it's usually short-lived. So if that container shuts down, you lose all your data, right? But it's also very fast, but it has intrinsic limits with what you do, right? So there are different options. Then the most common and probably the best database is relational, right? Relational is the database that works for 99.99999% of use cases, right? So this is Postgres, right? Postgres is probably the gold standard of relational, right? And so what this means is you can do joins, right? You can do joins and they're really efficient, etc., right? So relational databases are really performant. And then probably the newest entrant are NoSQL databases. So NoSQL databases are, despite their name, they still use a variation of SQL. But what it actually means is they are non-relational, right? So there's a lot of entrants in this space: MongoDB, DynamoDB, ClickHouse, all these kind of things, right? And what they specialize at is these analytical processes, so basically aggregating data. And the way they work is that they have these flat files, right? So they have very flat data structures with a lot of columns and a lot of data. Usually they're meant for like huge data sets. I'm talking about hundreds of terabytes of data is usually what the kind of scale we're looking at, right? But it's if you want to use NoSQL, you have to be very intentional about how you use it and when you use it, right? Because if you make a mistake and use NoSQL when you should have been relational, right, your performance will suffer greatly. But if you do the vice versa, also bad. But generally, relational, you should always start with relational, and then if you see your needs change, you move to a NoSQL database, right? So, but I just wanted to give a types of databases, right? So, for the purposes of this class, we are not special, right? We fall under the 99.99999% of use cases. So we will use a relational database, which we can create a free account, right, for training purposes, right, which is what we'll have to do. And so for that, we're going to use a tool called Supabase. Supabase is a very popular database option, has been very popular over years, and we'll talk about it. So why not the others? Well, in-memory is a good solution, but we want to deploy our app. And to deploy our app to some platforms, they do not support in-memory, right? So Vercel, for example, is where we'll be deploying our app. They do not support in-memory. And non-relational is overkill, right, for the needs of this class, right? So that is why we are going with Supabase, which is a relational database, right? So what is Supabase, right? What is Supabase? What is it doing, etc.? Well, Supabase is actually an open source Firebase alternative. So some of you might have heard or used Firebase, right? If any of you have gone to hackathons, I think Firebase is quite popular there, right? So Firebase is owned by Google, and it's a very popular database option, right? And the thing is, Supabase does a lot of things, and they do it well, right? So for example, they have a authentication, they have some email, they have all kinds of things, right? Authentication, databases, I think they have like workers, all these kind of things. And they have become a very popular star in the indie development tech stack, right? So for example, I'm working on a personal app, right, for professors and stuff like that. And I actually use Supabase for my database and my authentication because it's very good and it's free tier, allows you to be very generous and like build your app to full scale with kind of no issues, right? So Supabase has become very good, right? It's very nice and very easy to use, to be honest. And there's actually a lot of competitors in this space, right? There's like now there's a new one called I forget what it's called. It's like Code something. But there's a lot of unique competitors. And I mean, they're all good, right? They're all great, but Supabase is just the easiest. So for our purposes, we will be using their Postgres database, which is very generous with its free tier, right? Like 14 days, super easy, and super easy to connect, right? So for example, Vercel actually used to offer a database, but it was extremely complex to set up, right? So that's why I chose Supabase, because it allows us to not focus too much on like all the intricacies of how we connect, all those things, but allow us to easily just connect and use it within our app, right? And basically it'll allow us to create tables and maintain a live database for this class. Now, like I said, there are alternative Vercel Postgres, which actually, at the time of this recording, in 2026, I actually believe they discontinued Vercel Postgres, so not anymore. They actually link to Supabase, funny enough. And then, of course, Firebase, but Firebase costs money, and neither of them are as simple, to be honest, right? There's a lot of great databases, right? There's another one that I've been seeing pop up a lot, especially with AI agents. But again, it's very tailored to AI agents, not really towards the use case here that we have, right? So it's just overkill generally. So Supabase is the best of all worlds, right? Now, before we get started, what I want to introduce is a SDK. It'll be really important because the SDK is the way we will communicate with Supabase from our app. So to leverage Supabase within our app, we will use the Supabase SDK. Now, what does SDK stand for? Well, it stands for Software Development Kit, right? Think of it like a set of tools, right? It's like Legos, right? So Legos, there's all these predefined pieces. And then you basically decide, okay, if I put this piece this way, blah, 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 it'll end up like this, right? So an SDK gives you all these Lego pieces. And you basically say, oh, okay, I'm going to use all these pieces, put them together in my app, and here's how I can leverage them to make some end result, right? So an SDK is just giving you all these pieces. In code, it's giving you all these functions which you can use, right? So an SDK provides us all common functions to accomplish things for a certain app. So for example, the Supabase SDK gives us a common insert function to insert data from Supabase, right? And the reason you want to use the SDK is because it abstracts away the nuances of how you actually do that and make it easy for you. Because it's really hard to do that otherwise, right? Because you'd have to make an API call in a specific way with the keys in a certain way, etc., etc. But why? Why do all those things when they basically say, hey, use this function and we'll take care of everything for you, right? You just give us your API key and you use this function and done, solved. And we've defined how it'll output, we handled errors for you, everything, right? So an SDK makes our life so much easier, right? So SDK is really important, and when we're actually in the demo part, we will actually set up that, right? So before we go further, let's Supabase, right? So what we're going to do is go ahead, create an account on Supabase. It's completely free. It's going to tell you to create an organization. Go ahead, create one. And in there, we will create tables. For the JavaScript part, don't worry about that. We will follow along. I'll walk through what we're going to do there. So, all right, let's hop right on over there and get started. All right, so here is the Supabase website. So obviously I already have an account, so I can't show you everything, but I will walk you through how Supabase works and the kind of offerings they have. So as you go there, the first thing you'll see is their Postgres database. This is their bread and butter. This is what they became famous for in the indie community, right? So this is definitely one of the other ones, or like this is their king. This is their moneymaker, right? And then outside of that, they have a lot of other cool things, right? So they have like general storage, vector storage, data APIs, authentication, edge functions, all these kind of cool things. And what's really cool about Supabase is you can use it with any framework, right? So they pretty much have a SDK available for anything. So super easy to use, super easy to set up. So really great, right? So with that, what we're going to do is go ahead, click start your project, right? And here you'll see I already have organization. It'll tell you to create an organization, right? So mine's called INST377 UMD. You can name yours anything. It doesn't really matter, right? But go ahead, set that up. And what you're going to do is once you do that, go ahead and click create new project. So we'll go here. And so what you're going to do is set up like a project here. So we'll do INST377 dash week 12. Right? And then we need to set a database password. I'm just going to click generate password and copy it, right? It'll randomly generate one. Great. Make sure to keep this password because we need it. Okay. So make sure to keep this somewhere, store it on a notepad, do something, right? And then here, choose like the region most recommended for us. So here, like we're obviously in Virginia, so I'm going to choose North Virginia, but it doesn't really matter, right? And then as you can see, there's some security options, enable data API, right? Keep that checked. And then here it says enable automatic RLS. Keep that unchecked. It is very important that you keep it unchecked, otherwise you will get a lot of issues, right? So with that, and I'll explain what that is in a bit. So with that, let's go ahead, click create new project. Okay. All right, so now that the project is created, it's going to take a second, right? It's going to say status, healthy, great. So now what you can do is you can go here and there is a table editor, right? And so this table editor is how you actually create the table. You can also do this programmatically, but it's easier for us to just set up the create table, and then from there we will modify it. So what we'll do is go ahead, click create table, and here give the name to the table. Let's say customers. Okay, so we'll set up a customer table. Actually, let's call it customer. Sorry. And now here it says enable RLS. Make sure to uncheck this. Okay, right? We are not using RLS. You can, right? So what is RLS? Well, RLS is really interesting, right? So for any production grade RLS or production grade app, RLS is mandatory. So what is RLS? RLS basically says that, let's say you have a customer, right? Customer A and customer B, right? Now, when customer A logs in, we have to make sure that, hey, customer A cannot access customer B's data. Otherwise, game over. Your SaaS is not SaaSing anymore. It's going to be lawsuited to out the wazoo, right? So what RLS does is it restricts it at the table level. So even if you make a mistake in the code, it's fine, right? What it's saying is this tenant, customer A, right, based on some field, so for example, there'll be a field called customer ID, says that it can only access rows where customer ID is equal to customer A, right? It cannot, no matter how much it tries, customer A cannot access customer B tables. So if I query as customer A from my data, if I do a select star, it will only show me the customer A columns, right? So it's basically like a physical restriction on the data. And this is mandatory nowadays in multi-SaaS environments, basically. So multi-tenant environments require this, right? So if you're doing something like SOC 2 compliance, anything like that, they're going to mandate RLS, right? And it's very secure, right? But for the reason for this app, it is super overkill. We don't need it, so I disabled it, but yeah. But just good to know, right? So now here, there is some columns, right, already created, ID. So ID is, an ID, and the key here is we said that it's primary. And if you click the setting here, it'll say is identity, which means automatically assign a sequential unique number, right? So it'll automatically create ID. Very nice, right? And it's the primary, so there can't be more than one ID, right? Then there's a created at, which defaults to now, right? So it defaults to a now or now at time zone UTC, right? So we're doing now, which is fine. And now let's go ahead and add some more columns. So first click add column, and here we will add one called customer first name, right? And we will say that is a varchar or a text, either one doesn't matter. And what we'll do is we'll say that it is mandatory, right? So how do we do that? Well, we say that it is settings, sorry, wrong thing, is primary. There you go. Or nope, sorry, wrong thing. Okay, that's fine actually. I thought there should be a setting for is not null. Oh yeah, so here you can see is nullable, right? So by default, the column is, we assume that it cannot be null, or we assume that it cannot be null, right? So that's fine. And then we have customer last name, right? And again, we'll use a varchar. And again, nullable. And then we'll do customer state. And we will make this a optional column, right? So we'll use, again, a varchar. And what we'll do here is we'll click settings and say is nullable, right? And here we can also make this, oh, and for customer last name, we have to also uncheck is nullable. We want it to be mandatory, okay? So nullable basically means that if I send it no data, it's okay. But if I don't have a customer first name and last name, what's the point, right? So a state can be optional, right? So there we go. So now that's it. So now all we have to do is go ahead and click save here, okay? And with that, woohoo, the customer table is created. Now let's go ahead and try to insert some data. So I'm going to click insert here, click insert row, and we're just going to do this automatically. So here you'll put unmul, and here you will say dash, and let's just say keep that null for now and click save. Right, now look at that, that's so cool. So it created the ID automatically, I didn't, then created at first name, last name. Super cool, right? And so now we can actually use this in our code, which is great. So now what we're going to do is switch back to the slides, talk about how we can actually use this in our code, and then hop on over to VS Code where we'll actually. All right, so as I mentioned, right, to do this, we will use the Supabase SDK. And there's some great docs that they've outlined, which basically tell you how to use it, right? So they tell you how to fetch data, right, using this supabase.from, blah, 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 and I will also go over it, right? But it's very important that we use the SDK. So for this class, what we're going to focus on is fetching and inserting the data, right? And to set up the SDK, right, the most important things here are these. So here, there's going to be a Supabase URL, right? And then a Supabase key. These are very important. I will show you how to get both of these, but these are available in the Supabase UI, right? So the Supabase URL, Supabase key, and then all you do is you do Supabase client.create client from the URL and key. Right? And then of course it has to be installed, right? So it's like Express, right? You have to install it and then you just create the client out of it, right? Then you can basically say, hey, supabase.fetch.whatever, right? And get the data, right? So it's really nice and really easy, right? And I'll show you how to get these in a bit, but yeah. So now let's go over the SDK a little bit more. So let's take an example. How do we actually get data using the SDK? Well, to get data, we can do something like a simple select. And it can have complex statements, of course, but what the SDK does is it basically takes the data from the select and responds as a JSON object, right? So for example, here, what we're saying is, we say await Supabase, right? Supabase is a client. From the customer table, select all. Okay, easy as that. Right, and here you can see we have this const data error. You might be looking and be like, okay, great, I have this thing, but what is this, right? Well, what is this data error? What does this even mean, right? I see it's a variable. Well, that's a great question. So what that is called a restructuring response. So what does that mean? So in Supabase, right, and a lot of SDKs, they send back data in an object, right? So when we ask Supabase for info, it hands us back some data as an object. And in this case, there are two items in this object, data and error, right? In JS, what we do is we destructure, which means reading those objects. And to do that, we use that shortcut, const curly brace, and then the objects we want from the response, so data is an object we want, error is a response object we want, etc., from whatever, right? And this is going to be highly dependent. So what is returned by the object will always change based on the SDK or function you're using. So for example, for Supabase, they return two things, data and error, right? For something else, they might call it object data or something, you know? So you have to change based on that. So Supabase gives data, which is an array of objects, which is typically your rows from the database, or null, if it fails, and then also an error object, which contains details about if there was an error, or null if it succeeded, right? And you can see it's really simple, right? You just do const, curly braces, data, error, equals await supabase.from table, or whatever, await supabase any operation, right? So this could be any operation here, right? For now, we've of course said from, but if I wanted to, like, if I removed from and it was something else, totally works too. It's basically anything from Supabase, and it gives you back the data and error. And then those become variables you could use, right? So then you could say something like, console.log data, right? Right, you could do something like that, or you could do something more complex like data.forEach, right? And then say row, right? And then do something like row dot, whatever, print the row, manipulate the row, do something with it, right? So you can do anything with it, right? And then you can also use the error to say, hey, if there's an error, send that error, right? And so all of this can be used as like an API response. So you could say, hey, like, here's the response from the API, it gave me an error, or here's the data, etc., right? So all of these can be useful, right? So now let's say we want to insert data using the SDK. How do we do that? Well, to insert data, it's very easy. You can insert multiple rows. All you have to do is specify a JSON with the key value pair. And at the end, select the data to see the output, right? So if you look at this, right, again, here you have Supabase, right? Oh, sorry, wrong one. Supabase, right? Dot from customer, right? Insert is the keyword, and you can see it's an array of JSONs, right? And this JSON basically has the keys. So cust first name, cust last name, cust date is equal to whatever variables, right? And then there is an optional select, right? The select basically says, okay, well, if you want to see the output of what you inserted, here's how you do it. You don't have to do that, but it's just a nice way to confirm that, hey, here's the data, right? And when you do a select, what's great is, like, for example, if there's an ID or something, it'll return that data for you. You can also restrict the select to say, hey, only return me column A, B, or C, right? So you can do all kinds of fun combinations of things, right? Now, in Supabase, to handle errors, I kind of already gave it away. So sometimes your code, while trying to insert data, can error out, right? For example, you could try to use the same primary key, you could make a non-nullable column null, etc. Right? So it's very important to handle errors, otherwise the user will have a weird error show up, and it may expose data unnecessarily. So here, what we do is, from that same const data error, we take the error object first, and we say, hey, if there is an error, then log out and then send the customer that error saying that, hey, we got a 500, right? Or you could catch that and say, hey, like, we got an error, we don't know what's wrong, please try again in a bit, right? Else, actually send the data, right? So this is what's really nice, right? So you can take the data, take the error, manipulate it, do whatever you want, make sure it gives the right output, right? So now with that, let's go ahead and let's connect the data, right? So let's hop right on over and start connecting the data. All right, so welcome back to your favorite program, VS Code. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is actually make a new folder called Supabase sample app, right? Because remember, Supabase needs to be used with Node.js, right? I think I called that out in the slides, or maybe I didn't. No, I believe I did. Yeah, do this in a Node.js app, right? So remember, reference last week if you haven't set that up before, but we'll still go through the basic steps. So week 12, go ahead, create a new folder, call it Supabase sample app, right? And then here we're going to right click, click open an integrated terminal, and great. And then we're going to do an npm init. Okay, great. So package name Supabase sample app, great. Version, great. Description, a sample app to showcase a Supabase, right? And then entry point, let's say we should do probably index.js is probably fine. Test command is fine. Get repository is fine. Keywords is fine. Author, put yourself. License is fine. Type is fine. Say yes. Great. So now in the Supabase sample app, you should see a package.json. Great. This is the first start to our journey. All right, so now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to install something called NodeMon, right? So NodeMon, if you recall, is how it can actually automatically refresh the page when you install it, right? So what we'll do is we'll do npm install NodeMon, okay? And it'll go ahead, install it for us. You'll see it show up in the package.json as a dependency, right? Perfect. And then we will install Supabase. So how do we install Supabase? Well, if we go back to the Supabase SDK, go here, you can see here they gave the install command at the top, npm install supabase.js. So we're going to copy that and go back. Oh, sorry, wrong thing. Go to VS Code and go ahead and type that in. Okay, so this installs the Supabase package for us to use, which is great, right? And then the last thing we're going to install is Express, right? Because we want this to be an Express app, right? That's very important for us. Okay. All right. Perfect. And we have our app. Okay, so we have the basic of our app at least. So great. So now let's go ahead and create a index.js. So I'll go ahead, right click, new file, index.js. Perfect. And so now let's start setting up our app. So first thing, we're going to set up Express, right? So to do that, we do const express equals require Express. And remember, the reason we're setting up Express is so that we can use it to use APIs and stuff like that, right? And then do const app equals express, parentheses, const port equals 3000, and then do a app.listen at the bottom. App.listen, right? Say port, comma, parentheses, equals, then say console.log app is available on port, then $sign port, $sign curly braces. Perfect. Did I spell port right? Yes, I did. Okay. And then what we'll do is we will go back to our package.json, right? And create a script here for the start. So it will be nodemon -e asterisk. And then comma. Perfect. And then we'll go here and type npm start. Make sure it all works. Perfect. Okay, app is available on port 3000. So let's just make sure I'm going to change something. Okay, perfect. So I had to kill my port 3000 because I had something running from some other testing I was doing. So just make sure your port 3000 is not running anything else. Okay. All right. Perfect. So great. This is amazing, right? So great. This is great. So now we have an Express app. Now, obviously, we don't have the Supabase integration yet, anything, right? So how do we set that up? Well, what we're going to do is use the Supabase client. So what we'll do is go to const Supabase client is equal to require, and then do @Supabase/Supabase-JS, right? And then what we're going to do is say, okay, well, this is great. So now we will say const Supabase URL is equal to something, and then const Supabase key is equal to something. Okay. Now, obviously, you're going to ask, okay, well, where do I get this from, right? So we'll go back to our Supabase here and go back to our database, actually. So we'll go to supabase.com, go to our project. Oh, sorry. For some reason, I'm not logged in. Here it is. All right. So here in your project, there should be a little connect icon. So go ahead, click that. Okay, sorry about that. I got a little confused, but figured it out. So yeah, so here we can use Next.js app router. And here you'll see there's a public Supabase URL, which you can copy, right? Go to your app and put that in Supabase URL, and then get the Supabase key, which is this publishable key, and you can copy that. I request you not to steal my key, but yeah. Okay, great, cool. All right, so there we go. So we have our URL, we have our key, and now what we have to do is actually create the Supabase client, and that's super easy. All we do is we type const Supabase equal to Supabase client dot create client. And then we type Supabase URL, comma, Supabase key. Okay. And now you'll see the app should load. Great. Amazing. That's it. Wow, it's really easy, right? I mean, that is it. That's all we had to do to create the Supabase client. So now what we can do is actually use something like an API and actually test that it actually gets the data. So what we're going to do is create a app.get. So what we'll do is we'll do app.get, right? And we'll do /customers, right? And then here we'll do a async, or actually no, we will do a rec comma res, right? And then do a lambda function, right? And then say console.log attempting to get all customers. Okay. And then from there, what we need to do to get data from Supabase is really easy. So all we do is we type const, and then remember we have to destructure the output from the Supabase client. So we do const curly brace data, comma error within the curly braces, right? And then from there we say equal to await or equal to Supabase dot from, and here you put the table name. So you put customer, and then do dot select. Okay, great. So now if we look at this and make sure that's all good and great, it looks to work perfectly fine. Great. Okay, so now let's go ahead and all we're going to do is just do a console.log on data. And we'll just say received data :data or comma data. Okay, great. So now what's really cool is this is now an API. So all we have to do is go to Insomnia. So let's start up Insomnia. Okay, use my local scratchpad here, and then go to localhost 3000 / customers and set it to a get. Click send, and let's see what happens. Okay, so now look at this. It's freezing. There's nothing going on here, right? You might be like, huh? Well, what's going on, right? Well, the problem is I didn't actually return anything, so it's like it's basically going on forever and ever and ever. But let's take a look at here. Well, here it says, receive data undefined. Wonder why, right? That's not ideal. So let's look into this a little bit. So if you look here in the select, right, it should get from the customer database, but I made a mistake, right? So if you go here and type customer with a capital C, and then try hitting the API again, and ignoring that, go here. Oh, sorry. Well, oh, I think I didn't save. Try again. Receive data undefined. Okay, interesting. So let's go back to Supabase and double check that we have everything. So it is actually lowercase c, so that is on me. Well, some error must be happening. So let's go ahead and see what's happening. So what we'll do here is do this, and we'll say if error, right? Then console.log and then say error $$ right? And then what we'll do is we will actually send this error to the API, right? So because we just want to say, okay, it's done. So res dot status code equals 500 and res dot send error. Okay, great. All right, so after some debugging, I figured it out. So I went back to the docs and I realized here that this Supabase client, right, actually returns an async operation, right? So if you look at the create client here, actually, I'm not sure if it's very well defined in their docs, but if you look at their, let's see, let's go to their from maybe. It actually returns a promise, right? So if you look at the data here, Wonder if it tells you. It doesn't tell you. Well, what you can do actually is type await, right? And here it'll give you an error saying await is only valid in async functions. So what you do is you make this async. But now, right, you go back and you hit Insomnia, and if you look at the logs, would you look at that? It shows the data. So cool. So yeah, it needs to be an await. Supabase.from.select must be returning a promise, which is why it didn't show up, right? So, pretty straightforward. Okay, so now all we have to do is actually send back this data. So what we can do is say if error, else, and then do res.json, and here we just type data, right? Because we'll just send back the data. Right, so here what I'll do is I'll put a console.log here, and then the error has that, and perfect. All right, that should work exactly as we expect. So now we go back to Insomnia, click send, and would you look at that? That is so cool, right? So now we're actually hitting the database, making a database call, getting the data. So much fun, right? So that's actually really cool, right? So, I mean, that's some pretty cool progress. But now let's take this a step further. So far we have an API to actually get the customer data, but what if we want to take it a step further and tell the user, hey, I want you to add new customers, right? So how do we do that? Well, let's go ahead and do an app.post, post. And here we'll do a /customer. Anytime you need to add data, it should be a post. Just remember that, right? And we'll set it up the same way. It needs the async, right? Do a rec, res, right? And then we'll put the lambda function. And here what we'll do is we'll do a console.log adding, adding customer. Okay. Right? And now you're going to ask me, okay, well, how do I actually, use the data from the customer? Well, let's go ahead and test this out. So for now, I'm just going to do a res.json of empty, just so that it doesn't error out, right? And here what we'll do is we'll console.log request. So here you can see we ask for a request and a response object. So here we can actually log out the request. So let's go ahead and take a look. So request $rec. And now let's go ahead and change this to post, or actually let's create a new request. Okay, and here we'll copy the same thing, but it'll be /customer singular, and we'll make it post, right? And click send. Let's see. Okay, great. We see that, and let's see. Look at that. So first thing you see is request actually says object, right? Not much helpful to us. So first thing we're going to do is do a json.stringify rec. Okay. And we'll go ahead and click send again. Oh, okay, interesting. So it's saying some error, right? So first thing, I probably made a mistake, right? I didn't send anything in the data. So let's go ahead and send some data. So we'll go ahead, click JSON here and say, first name, me, okay, and click send. Let's see. Okay, so there's an error. Let's go ahead and look at the logs a little more. This looks insane. You look at this and you're like, I cannot read what it's saying, but if you see it says converting circular circle to just JSON, blah, blah, blah. Basically what it's saying is, hey, I can't actually understand what this is. Like, though you're sending it, I don't actually know what this is. So what you have to do is install this thing called body parser, right? So if you go here and look up JavaScript body parser, right? This is basically a middleware. And middleware basically means it's in the middle of your application. And what it does is it parses incoming request bodies in your middleware available under request.body, right? So it's really important. So all we have to do is basically set up npm install body parser. So let's go ahead and do exactly that, right? And what we're going to do here is go here, close the app, make sure to shut it down, and go ahead and type that npm install body parser, right? And then we just have to import it. So here we have to type, actually let's type it here and do const body parser equal to require body parser. Great. And then the other thing we need to do is here, after the app is initialized, we say app.use, say body parser.json, basically telling it, hey, I want you to process it as a JSON. Okay, great. So that's all we're going to do. No other changes, right? So make sure you install it, then add the body parser and the app.use, okay? And that's all we're going to do. So now we'll go ahead, start up the app again, npm start, and it says, hey, module not found. Why? Probably because it made a mistake. Oh, because I made a mistake. This should be body hyphen parser. Ha ha ha. Sorry, that's on me. Okay, great. Now it's good. So now all we gotta do is go back to Insomnia and click send. Okay, cool. So now we got a converting circular structure. Let's go ahead and see what's going on. Seems to be the same issue, but let's go ahead and change one thing. So here, instead of json.stringify rec, do rec.body. Okay. And then go ahead and click Insomnia. Okay, now it stopped the error, but now let's look at the logs. Well, would you look at that? The request now comes in as first name me. Okay, so now you can start seeing the potential of where this is going, right? So our data is now available to us in this rec.body, right? And then now we can actually leverage that and actually start adding data, right, to this, right? So that's pretty cool, right? So how do we start doing this? Well, let's go ahead and first ask ourselves, okay, what do we want from the user? Well, we probably want a first name, probably want a last name, maybe want a state, right? And then we want to add that into the database, right? Sounds about right. So let's go ahead and we'll do exactly that. We'll say const first name equal to rec.body dot first name, right? And then const last name is equal to rec.body dot last name, right? Easy, right? And then all we have to do is then take that data and then pass it to Supabase, right? We basically have to say, okay, great, thank you, let me take that data and use it in Supabase. So how do we do that? Well, if we go back to Supabase here, assuming I have the docs up, yep, there is a data set here called insert data, and you can see how you insert it. So you insert with a JSON. So what you do here is you use the keys from your database, so customer first name, customer last name, and insert the data accordingly. So we can do exactly that. So all we have to do now is say exactly the same thing here. Const data equals await Supabase. Right? But here, await Supabase, instead of doing, so we still do dot from and from customer, right? It is case sensitive, so keep that in mind, customer, right? And here, instead of doing a select, we do a dot insert, okay? And here, what we'll do is we'll take a JSON array or a JSON object, right? And on the left side, right, the keys will be exactly as it should be in a Supabase. So that's going to be customer first name, colon first name, my first name, right? And then customer last name, colon last name. Okay, great. So there we go. And then what we can do is do a dot select, right? And then in our res.json, return the data again. That's it, okay? Super easy, right? Now, I'm going to go ahead and cause an error and show you what happens, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead, right? Go to Insomnia and just pass in first name and click send. Okay, well, we got a null. Means something probably bad. So what happened is some error occurred, but we don't know what the error is. So we need to again go ahead and start logging out the error. So if error, right, which means if there is any error, then go ahead and we're going to copy this. We're going to copy this exact logic here, right? And then we'll say else res.json data, right? Because that means it was successful. Right, and we can say control, there you go, perfect. And so what we're going to do is go back here and click send. and we'll see something. Look at that. So failing row contains blah, null value in column, customer last name, which means I didn't pass it in a last name, right? Which is a very valid reason for it to fail, right? So saying null value in column of relation violates not null constraint. So basically saying, hey, you didn't pass in some last name. So let's go ahead and say last name, me. Okay. And click send. Now look at that. That's pretty cool. All right. So now if we go back to our other API and click send, let's see what happens. Look at that. Both are now created, and that is super, super cool, right? So that's so much cool. That's so cool, right? So now we have a real app using the data, etc., and we're actually able to use it and actually listen to, oh, okay, yeah, this actually like we can actually insert data into a real database and use that data, right? So now imagine you could take this data and then say, hey, like I want to, manipulate based on the date of the data, maybe say, hey, this person did X, this person did Y, this person is a junior, is a senior, is blah, 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 right? So you can do all these cool things, right? Now, there's one more thing I want to talk about before we go forward. So as you can see, there is a customer state null, right? So we're obviously not taking in a customer state. Now, that is fine, right? That we're saying it's null. But what I want to show you is how you can actually make that pretty cool. So let's go ahead and start taking in a state. So what we'll do is we'll do customer state colon state, right? Okay, right? Pretty easy, right? So we're just saying, okay, great customer state, you'll pass in a variable called state. Okay, and then we have to obviously use the const state here equal to request dot body dot state. Okay, perfect. And now what we'll do is go ahead and here we will pass in a state. So we'll do state and let's just say Maryland. Okay. Okay, so great. Cool, it's inserting. Now, here's the issue. So now the state variable is so open. So I could type Maryland, right? I could type Maryland, right? Or I could spell it completely wrong and say Maryland. I don't know, right? And it lets you, right? So this is a real issue, right? Because the database can't validate that. So what we could do is now use functions or use SDKs or other options in our code and actually do that, right? So we could use logic and basically say, hey, or we could say, hey, if state is 2 letters, only then allow it. Or if state is valid and within a list of 50, allow it. But that's very tedious, right? So why do we want to do that? Well, luckily, we don't have to do that. So there's this great package called USA State Validator JS. Okay, and you'll see there's this great thing, right? And so what this does is it allows us to, again, just install it, right? And then we can say, hey, is this valid state input, and say Ohio or Ohio or Ohio, right? And then we can say, is this a valid state name? Ohio, Ohio, Ohio. Or we can say, is valid state abbreviation, right? So Ohio, right? And you can do all these kind of fun things, which is really cool. And we don't have to do any of it ourselves. So all you do is you go ahead and copy this, right? And go ahead and install the state validator. Again, close your Node app and install it, right? And this is where it gets really cool. So now it's super easy to use. So now we can go through its docs, right, on how to use it, but you can see here it basically tells you const blah 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 equals require blah, right? Now the one we need is valid state abbreviation. Const is valid state abbreviation equals require USA state validator. So we're going to copy that exactly and put that at the top here, right? So super easy. And now all we're going to do is say, hey, here we're going to basically start mandating the state. So basically say, hey, if is valid state abbreviation, and say state, right? Okay, and here what we're going to do is say if not, right? So an exclamation, right? So we're going to say, hey, if it's not a valid abbreviation, then we basically want to log it out and say console.log, and we can say state colon $ state in curly braces, of course, is invalid, right? And now what we want to do is tell the error that this is wrong. So we use something called a 4xx status code, right? Saying, hey, that you didn't give us the right data. So what you do is you say res.status code equals 400, right? And then just do res.json and do basically whatever you want. So here we'll do a message colon, and then here we'll do $state is not a valid two-letter abbreviation for state. Great. So now let's go ahead and see what happens. So this is going to be pretty interesting. So now go npm start again, go back to Insomnia, and we're going to do Mariland and click send. It says, great, Mariland is not a valid two-letter abbreviation. That's pretty cool. But I'll tell you, we still made a mistake. So what is that? Well, if you go back to your logs, you'll see something. You'll see that it says basically state Mariland is headed, and then it says cannot set headers after they are sent to the client, right? Which is kind of weird, right? It's like, what does that actually mean, right? So what's happening is, right, if you go actually here, if you go to your Insomnia and go to your database and do a get, you'll see, look at that, it still went through. Actually, let's use a different state just so I can prove this to you. Let's say Virginia, right? I spelled it wrong too, but if you look here and do a get again, you'll see Virginia still got created, and you'll be like, why? I just threw an error, right? Well, the problem is, though you sent an error, the code is still going, right? You just sent the error, but the code still goes. So what you have to do is do return, okay? And now you can go here and go to your post and start sending. And now let's say we do Alabama. I don't know. Alabama. Okay. Click send and go to here. Click send. You'll see it's not added, right? But now if instead of Alabama I typed AL, right? And click send. Look at that. It created it. Pretty cool, right? So now I hope you're starting to get an idea of how you can start mixing in all these concepts, right? You can use different JS libraries. You can do all this cool stuff. You could do a lot of custom logic on the back end. You can make APIs as you want, etc. And you can integrate that with the database, which is so much fun, right? So there's a lot of cool things you can do, right? So I guess with that, that is really all I had today. It was a shorter lecture. I just kind of wanted to cover databases quickly. But this is going to be very useful for your project. So I encourage you to go sign up for Supabase at least, because you will need that account for your project to set up the database. And yeah, we will go from there, and it's going to be pretty interesting. So with that, that is all I had. Thank you all. I will see you all next week. Next week is my favorite lecture of the semester because we actually deploy our app, which is really exciting. And again, do not forget, please start assignment 2 early. And yeah, all right, that is it. Thank you all. I'll see you all next week.